There is a moment, standing on the waterfront of Rio de Janeiro, when the past and present seem to exist in the same breath. The mountains rise behind you, Corcovado, the Tijuca peaks, green and impossible against the blue. Guanabara Bay stretches wide and silver before you, one of the great natural harbors of the world. And where crumbling warehouses and a roaring elevated highway once blocked the city from its own shoreline, something new has taken shape, something recovered, something reimagined. This is the story of Porto Maravilha, translated simply as Marvelous Port, a name that carries both a memory and a promise. For most of the 20th century, the port district of Rio de Janeiro was a place the rest of the city tried to forget. What had once been the proud engine of a growing nation, the gateway through which coffee, steel, and commerce flowed to and from the world, had fallen into deep neglect. Grand warehouses that once bustled with dock workers sat empty and crumbling. Streets were broken and nearly impassable. The neighborhood that had witnessed the arrival of Portuguese royalty, the unloading of enslaved Africans, and the first tremors of Brazilian industrialization had been left behind. And cutting through the heart of it all was the Elevado da Perimetral, a massive elevated highway that strangled the neighborhood in shadow and noise, day and night, year after year. Residents and visitors alike moved past this area, never through it. But the port itself had a history far too rich to be forgotten. Back in the 1870s, the first serious plans for developing the port of Rio de Janeiro began to take shape. Brazil was a nation on the move, an empire still, under Dom Pedro II, hungry for infrastructure that could match its growing ambitions on the world stage. The Doca da Alfândega was constructed during this period, a modest but meaningful beginning that planted the seed of something far larger. The logic was clear. Rio de Janeiro sat beside one of the most generous natural harbors on earth. Guanabara Bay offered shelter, depth, and access. What was missing was the engineering to unlock it. By 1890, government decrees authorized private companies, Industrial de Melhoramentos do Brasil and the Rio de Janeiro, harbor and docks among them, to build berths, warehouses, and working wharves along the western shore of the bay. The stretches chosen were deliberate and strategic, from Ilha das Cobras to the Arsenal de Marinha, from the arsenal south toward Ponta do Caju. These were not arbitrary decisions. They reflected a careful reading of the bay's geography, the movement of tides, and the practical realities of loading and offloading cargo at scale. Engineers had to reckon with soft, unstable ground near the waterline. They had to design structures that could absorb the slow, relentless stress of tidal movement and the sudden shock of heavy cargo loads. By 1903, the federal government had hired the British firm C.H. Walker and Company to carry out further construction and sweeping improvements along the wharf areas. Walker's team brought industrial experience and engineering precision to a project of considerable complexity. New infrastructure followed steadily. The Gamboa Wharf was built, a serious working structure designed for serious working vessels. 7 warehouses rose along the water's edge, built to store the enormous variety of goods that would pass through this port. Coffee bound for Europe, wheat arriving from Argentina, steel products moving in both directions. The engineering challenges were real and constant. Driving pilings into the floor of the bay required machinery and techniques that pushed the limits of what Brazilian construction had attempted before. Coordinating the drainage, the rail connections, the road access, and the warehouse placement into a coherent whole demanded a level of planning that was genuinely ambitious for its era. Workers, many of them Afro-Brazilian men whose labor shaped the city even as the city denied them recognition, drove every nail, moved every stone, and poured every foundation. On July 20th, 1910, the port opened officially. It was a moment of civic pride and national ambition. Rio de Janeiro was announcing itself to the world. The third busiest port in all of Brazil had arrived and was open for business. For decades, the port performed its function faithfully and impressively. Pig iron and steel products moved outward to markets around the globe. Wheat and zinc concentrate came in. Electronics, rubber, petrochemicals, vehicle parts, coffee, and pressed paper rolls all passed through its berths in a constant rhythm of commerce. The numbers alone tell a compelling story. A pier stretching 6.7 kilometers along the bay's edge. 31 berths capable of receiving vessels of serious size, water depths reaching as far down as 15 meters, accommodating the draft of modern cargo ships, 15 open patios and 18 warehouses, all coordinated under the management of Companhia Docas de Rio de Janeiro. In a single year, 2016, the port handled more than 6 million metric tons of cargo and processed nearly 300,000 shipping containers. Behind these numbers were generations of longshoremen, crane operators, engineers, customs officials, logistics managers, and municipal planners. People whose names history rarely preserves, but whose daily labor kept the commerce of a nation moving through this single point on Guanabara Bay. Road connections along BR 040, BR 101, and BR 116 linked the terminal to the broader country. Rail lines carried freight inland towards Sao Paulo and Minas Gerais, operated by MRS Logistica and Ferrovia Centro Atlantica, running on track gauges wide enough to handle Brazil's heaviest industrial loads. And yet, by the late 20th century, something had gone profoundly wrong with the district surrounding that port. The neighborhood had become disconnected, degraded, and in many places genuinely dangerous. The Elevado da Perimetral, that hulking elevated highway constructed in the mid-20th century as a modernist solution to urban traffic, had become a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. It cut the waterfront off from the city behind it. It generated noise, pollution, and visual blight at a scale that suffocated street life and discouraged investment. Beneath its shadow, the neighborhood deteriorated decade by decade. Then came the announcement. Rio de Janeiro would host the 2016 Olympic Games, and city leadership made a decision that was equal parts bold and necessary. The Elevado da Perimetral would come down, and in its place, Porto Maravilha would rise. The demolition itself was a feat of urban engineering, 5 kilometers of elevated concrete highway, carefully dismantled to avoid damaging the living city beneath it. What had been a roaring diesel-choked barrier between the district and its bay became open sky almost overnight. The waterfront exhaled. But Porto Maravilha was never simply about tearing something down. New light rail lines were laid through the district, reconnecting it to the broader transit network of the city. Streets were repaved and redesigned for pedestrians as much as vehicles. Public squares emerged where there had been dereliction for decades. The Museum of Tomorrow, designed by the celebrated Spanish architect Santiago Calatrava, rose at the edge of the bay, a building of extraordinary ambition, its cantilevered form reaching over the water like a living creature frozen mid-motion, covered in solar panels and fed by the tidal energy of the bay itself. The financing model was equally innovative and controversial. The municipality of Rio de Janeiro entered into one of the largest public-private partnership arrangements in Brazilian history, transferring development rights to a consortium of construction companies in exchange for their commitment to fund and execute the urban renewal work. Billions of reais were committed. The arrangement attracted both admiration and serious criticism. Questions about displacement, about which residents benefited and which were pushed out, were raised loudly and repeatedly by community advocates, journalists, and urban scholars. These are not comfortable questions, but they are necessary ones. The history of waterfront revitalization around the world, from Baltimore's Inner Harbor to Barcelona's Vila Olímpica, from London's Docklands to Sydney's Darling Harbour, shows consistently that transformation at this scale brings both renewal and rupture. Porto Maravilha was no exception. It delivered genuine public amenity, genuine infrastructure improvement, and genuine cultural investment. It also generated displacement pressures and financial complications that the city is still working through. What it demonstrated at its most powerful was that a city can choose to reclaim its relationship with the water that made it. That infrastructure does not have to be permanent simply because it was built. That the port district where Brazilian commerce was born in the first decade of the 20th century could become, in the 21st, a place where culture, memory, and daily life take root together. The port still operates. Ships still move through Guanabara Bay, just as they have for more than a century. And above the waterfront, where the shadow of a highway once fell, there is now light. There are people walking. There are children at the water's edge. There is a city in honest conversation with its own past, and its imperfect, determined effort to write something worth keeping for the future. If you found this history worth knowing, subscribe for more stories of human ambition in steel, stone, and concrete.